Good morning. It is Wednesday, June the 5th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. My name is Ronald T. Hardgrove, and this is my podcast called The Drill. And The Drill is about being a true conservative and the difference between being a true conservative and a reactionary and why it matters. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I'm on Twitter @Ronald Hardgrove, and on Facebook I have a page called The Drill. You're not a Trump supporter, are you? You're not a conservative, are you? So you believe that anyone who questions President Obama's nationality isn't racist? How you deal with these questions determines whether you are truly a conservative. What is a true conservative? I'll give you an example. The left is always creating movements towards socialist paradise. A reactionary is dogmatic and defiant of those movements and seeks to create counter-movements. A true conservative is open-minded but unmoved unless there is a good reason to do so. Being truly conservative is also about integrity. Maintaining your integrity is about listening carefully and reading carefully. It's about not getting tricked, about responding and not reacting. Integrity is also about how you live, not just how you vote. True conservatism is not merely a political identity, but a philosophical reality. True conservatism is fundamentally about being realistic, and being realistic is fundamentally about making the presumption for the status quo. What does it mean to presume the status quo? It means that we recognize the benevolence of the universe and the expectation of success. We make the presumption for the United States of America and all of its institutions, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and trifurcated government. We do not try to turn the United States into another country, real or imagined. And so that's the introduction to my podcast, to give you an idea. And that's what makes this podcast, by the way, different than any other podcast or radio show that's political or cultural in nature, such as Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, etc. They usually fail to tell you what their programs are all about, and they just sort of wing it from beginning to end. So right now I want to go ahead and I'm going to play a recording I made of a book by Michael Sledge, and it's called A Soldier Dead, and it's about how and why it is that the United States of America in particular, and the military even more particularly, is so eager, or I can't say eager, is so intent on taking care of its battle dead. And this is a little clip from the introduction.
It is the dead who make the longest demands on the living. Sophocles from Antigone. Private First Class Fred Forey studied the map in his hand, trying to match the contour lines with the terrain in front of him. Once oriented, he and his squad lined up 1 or 2 arms lengths apart and began walking across the grassy field, keeping a careful eye out for tripwires and unexploded ordnance. Forey had grown up hunting and fishing in Louisiana, and his woods experience proved invaluable in his assignment with the Army Graves Registration Service. His duty and that of his squad and many other units that were fanned out across South Korea was to find and retrieve the remains of U.S. servicemen who had given their lives for their country. During 3 years of fighting, the North Koreans and Chinese, thousands had fallen, and many lay in foxholes, in bunkers, in fields, and on mountainsides. Their buddies, hard-pressed to save their own lives, had been forced to leave them behind. But they had made a promise to come back someday, find them, identify them, reunite them with their families, and give them a proper burial with all due honors. And while the fallen slept, their bodies returned to the soil. Looking for depression in the ground, an elongated patch of grass that grew taller and greener than the rest, old military equipment or defense fortifications, Forey and the others continued their search. From after-battle reports, they knew that the remains of a soldier were somewhere in the 1,000-meter square grid marked on the map. Eventually, their search line moved over and down 3 small knolls that some 100 or so yards farther came to the base of a cliff. There, against the cliff face, they saw that someone had built a semicircular rock wall that offered a small area of protection. They carefully climbed over the makeshift fort wall and found hundreds of machine gun and M1 Garand shell casings, and a score or more of grenade pins and handles scattered about. In the middle of this detritus of war, they also found the bones and gear webbing of a solitary U.S. soldier. Forey and his men knew that a furious battle had taken place at the rock fortification. In front of the rough-hewn fort and on the facing ground of the knolls lay the remains of more than 300 Chinese soldiers. What they couldn't comprehend, at first, was the large number of spent rounds behind the fort wall. One man didn't carry that much ammunition, and certainly not both a machine gun and a rifle. Adding to the mystery was a weather-beaten rope that hung down from the cliff above and behind the remains. As they continued to canvass the site, clearing away debris from the Americans' remains, carefully checking for live grenades or other explosives, the searchers concluded that there had to have been several men fighting from behind the rock wall. But what had prevented the recovery of the sole U.S. serviceman? Were there possibly more remains? They continued their investigation and finally were left with a single, inescapable conclusion. One soldier had stayed behind so the rest could escape to safety up the cliff. Quote, "There wasn't a dry eye in the squad by the time we finished recovering his remains," unquote, Forey told me one night in Princeton, Louisiana. The story still fresh in his mind, and his emotions resonating in his words 40 years later.
And that was the part 1 of the introduction for Soldier Dead, and by Michael Sledge, and it's all about the value that we place on bringing back our battle dead and all the honors and rituals surrounding it. So, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the concept of the day from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Thank you very much. And this is going to be part 2 of free will. The concept of the day yesterday, and it'll be the concept of the day again today. Reason is the faculty that identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses. It is a faculty that man has to exercise by choice. Thinking is not an automatic function. In any hour and issue of his life, man is free to think or to evade that effort. Thinking requires a state of full, focused awareness. The act of focusing one's consciousness is volitional. Man can focus his mind to a full, active, purposefully directed awareness of reality, or he can unfocus it and let himself drift in a semi-conscious daze, merely reacting to any chance stimulus of the immediate moment, at the mercy of his undirected sensory perceptual mechanism and of any random associational connections it might happen to make. When man unfocuses his mind, he may be said to be conscious in a subhuman sense of the word, since he experiences sensations and perceptions. But in the sense of the word applicable to man, in the sense of a consciousness which is aware of reality and able to deal with it, a consciousness able to direct the actions and provide for the survival of a human being, an unfocused mind is not conscious. Psychologically, the choice to think or not is the choice to focus or not. Existentially, the choice to focus or not is the choice to be conscious or not. Metaphysically, the choice to be conscious or not is the choice of life and death. A process of thought is not automatic, nor instinctive, nor involuntary, nor infallible. Man has to initiate it, to sustain it, and to bear responsibility for its results. He has to discover how to tell what is true or false, and how to correct his own errors. He has to discover how to validate his concepts, his conclusions, his knowledge. He has to discover the rules of thought, the laws of logic, to direct his thinking. Nature gives him no automatic guarantee of the efficacy of his mental effort. Nothing is given to man on earth except a potential and the material on which to actualize it. The potential is a superlative machine, his consciousness, but it is a machine without a spark plug, a machine of which his own will has to be the spark plug, the self-starter and the driver. He has to discover how to use it, and he has to keep it in constant action. The material is the whole of the universe, with no limits set to knowledge, to the knowledge he can acquire, and to the enjoyment of life he can achieve. But everything he needs or desires has to be learned, discovered, and produced by him, by his own choice, by his own effort, by his own mind. That which man's survival requires, that which man's survival requires is set by his nature and is not open to his choice. What is open to his choice is only whether he will discover it or not, whether he will choose the right goals and values or not. He is free to make the wrong choice, but not free to succeed with it. He's free to evade reality. He's free to unfocus his mind and stumble blindly down any road he pleases, but not free to avoid the abyss he refuses to see. Knowledge, for any conscious organism, is the means of survival to a living consciousness. Let's see here. Yeah, to a living consciousness, every is implies an ought. Man is free to choose not to be conscious, but not free to escape the penalty of unconsciousness, destruction. Man is the only living species that has the power to act as his own destroyer, and that is the way he has acted through most of his history. The faculty of volition operates in regard to the two fundamental aspects of man's life, consciousness and existence, i.e. his physiological action and his existential action, i.e. the formation of his own character and the course of action he pursues in the physical world. And that's going to be part 2 of free will. And it's also important, I'd read the definition of determinism, because free will and determinism are two philosophical issues that have been argued perhaps for 2,000 years. But it is obvious by the evidence of our senses that man does have free will. Marxists, the left, try to pretend that the free will does not exist and that everybody's behavior is determined by powers beyond their control. And this makes a difference in cases such as homelessness. What you have in the situation with in Los Angeles, where there's it's been variously described as a homeless crisis, that the way it's being handled or dealt with is, one of the phrases that the left uses here in LA is they fall into homelessness. And then they try to insist that the only reason folks are homeless is because rents have gone up. And neither one of those things are true. You don't fall into homelessness, and the rents in LA have not gone up all that much to all of a sudden put all of these people on the street. There was a report yesterday that homelessness went up 12% in the last year. But in any case, the point is, what they're trying to get at here is that people have no free will. There's a saying, there used to be a saying, on the left, they would began this argument about determinism and homelessness with the idea, who in their right mind would be homeless? Okay, and then that's their claim, that their empty claim that supposedly refutes free will. That's also, they say with tobacco, who in their right mind would smoke, knowing what smoking is about? Who in their right mind would use a product that when properly used would cause disease and death? Right? So nobody in their right mind would do so. So therefore, people must be forced to smoke. And the same thing with homelessness. Since nobody in their right mind would choose to be homeless, then they must be forced to be homeless by capitalists, of course, rent gougers and people like that. So the government must get involved. Local government, state government, federal government must get involved to provide counter force to take the people off the street and put them into suitable housing. And it's simply untrue. It also says, the corollary of that is that nobody's responsible for their behavior. So you have, not only do you have homeless people in LA, but you have homeless people that are, and not only in LA, but it's happening in San Francisco, defecating in the streets, shooting heroin, and the left is very blasé about it. There's nobody on the left that really seems alarmed or offended by it. They seem to at least pretend to take it in stride. Of course, none of this defecation is happening in their neighborhoods, in front of their houses or condominiums. It's happening somewhere else, so it's very easy to be blasé about it. But again, the claim is that the homeless are only doing what they're forced to do, and that they have no free will, and therefore they cannot be held responsible for their behavior. They should not be cited. They should not be, because that's the way it used to work. This isn't something this is not the status quo. The status quo was you became homeless, that's fine. You can be homeless. There's no law against being homeless, but there's a law against trespassing. There's a law against defecating or urinating in public. There are, or if not laws, ordinances, let's put it that way. There are ordinances and laws that say you cannot use illegal drugs. You cannot use heroin. You cannot, and you certainly can't do it in public. And so if you are in this position where you're homeless and you're trespassing, you're told to move along. If you refuse to do so, then you are arrested, and or you are given a citation. And if you fail to show in court on that citation, then a bench warrant is issued and you are arrested. So now, with the determinism idea, nobody is held accountable because as far as determinism is concerned, nobody is responsible for their actions. But it's baloney. We have free will, we can think, we can choose, and we know that we have free will by the evidence of our senses. And free will is the status quo, and the left has failed to make a prima facie case for determinism. That's the best way to put it. So, and when I come back, I'm going to be reading about conservatives and reactionaries. Thank you very much. I'm going to be reading about the reactionary mind, picking up where I left off yesterday. Let's see. Lest we think such sentiments and circumlocutions are peculiarly English, consider how the court historian of the American right approached the matter in 1976. What is conservatism? George Nash asked in his now classic The Conservative Intellectual Movement in America since 1945. After a page of hesitation, conservatism resists definition. It, quote, varies enormously with time and place, unquote. What political idea doesn't? It should not be confused with the radical right. Nash settled upon an answer that could have been given, indeed was given, by Peel, Salisbury, and son Kirk, and most of the thinkers on the radical right. Conservatism, he said, is defined by, quote, resistance to certain forces perceived to be leftist, revolutionary, and profoundly subversive of what conservatives at the time deemed worth cherishing, defending, and perhaps dying for. And it seems what he's getting to is tradition. A lot of people define conservatism as being the conservation of tradition. No. And even if it were, I wouldn't bother to be a conservative. I'm not going to go out and cherish, defend, and die for tradition. Tradition has its place in ceremonies. Ceremonies involving weddings, christenings, death, etc. But the rest of life is not about tradition. I get up at a certain time in the morning, and I do so not because it's traditional, but because it's the right time for me to get up. Back to the book. These are the explicit professions of the counter-revolutionary creed. More interesting are the implicit statements where antipathy to radicalism and reform is embedded in the very syntax of the argument. Take Michael Oakeshott's famous definition in his essay, quote, on being conservative, unquote. Quote, to be conservative, then, is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbound, the near to the distant, the sufficient to the superabundant, the convenient to the perfect, present laughter to utopian bliss. One cannot, it seems, enjoy fact and mystery, near and distant, laughter and bliss. One must choose. Far from affirming a simple hierarchy of preferences, Oakeshott's either-or signals that we are on existential. Okay, there we go. We are on existential ground, where the choice is not between something and its opposite, but between something and its negation. The conservative enjoys familiar things in the absence of forces seeking their destruction. Oakeshott concedes, but his enjoyment, quote, will be strongest when, quote, it, quote, is combined with evident risk of loss, unquote. The conservative is, quote, a man who is acutely aware of having something to lose which he has learned to care for, unquote. And while Oakeshott suggests that such losses can be engineered by a variety of forces, the engineers invariably seem to work on the left. Marx and Engels are, quote, the authors of the most stupendous of our political nationalisms, unquote, he writes. Elsewhere, quote, nothing can compare with, quote, unquote, their abstract utopianism. For that reason, quote, it is not at all inconsistent to be conservative in respect of government and radical in respect of almost every other activity, unquote. Not all inconsistent or altogether necessary. Radicalism is the raison d'etre, I guess is the way you pronounce it, of conservatism. The reason for being, let's put it that way. If it goes, conservatism goes too. Even when the conservative seeks to extricate himself from this dialogue with the left, he cannot, for his most lyrical motifs, organic change, tacit knowledge, ordered liberty, prudence, and precedent are barely audible without the call and response of the left. As Disraeli discovered in his Vindication of the English Constitution, it is only by contrast to a putative revolutionary nationalism that the invocation of ancient and tacit wisdom can have any purchase on the modern mind. And that's where I'm going to leave this for the time being. And when I come back, I'm going to be reading from a book called The Conservative Dictionary. Thank you very much. Welcome back. The Conservative Dictionary. And these are some of the, I'm going to be reading a few entries from the Conservative Dictionary. And we're in this C section. Censorship, noun, a liberal dysphomism intended to marginalize the attempts of conservatives to suppress child pornography, religious hate speech, or anti-American propaganda. Next entry, Center for American Progress. The Center for American Progress is a liberal propaganda machine that promotes the failed precepts of Keynesianism, the destructive democratic practices of class warfare and welfare vote buying, the socially repugnant concept of homosexual rights, and the discredited global redistribution of wealth conspiracy hysterically called global warming. The center was created in 2003 as a counterweight to such organizations as the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute. It is active in propagandizing through various email newsletters and blogs, in youth indoctrination through Campus Progress, and in lobbying through the Center for American Progress Action Fund. The center is funded by contributions from corporations, foundations, and individuals such as George Soros, and has an annual budget in the neighborhood of $25 million. And I want to comment real quick that they're talking about propagandizing. And there might be those people that would say, well, the American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, they just propagandize for the right. And that would be, that is where our cultural discourse leaves us today. This is where we are at, where everything is a matter of opinion. All opinions are equal except as to popularity. Unfortunately, for those on the left, that is untrue. It is false. You can find out, because there's basically one of a number of possibilities here. Either the American Heritage Foundation et al. Are telling the truth and are not propagandizing. The Center for American Progress is not propagandizing, or one or the other of them are propagandizing, or both of them are propagandizing. But through the definition, finding out and using the definition for the word propaganda, you should be able to use that definition to find out when and where and if any of these institutions are propagandizing. So it is possible that the Center for American Progress is nothing more than a propaganda organ, and that the Heritage Foundation et al. Are organizations that are interested in and promoting the truth. Next entry, change, noun. 1, something that's always worth less than what you had to pay for it. 2, what I have left after paying taxes to support all the Democrat freeloaders. And verbal transitive, a liberal code word meaning, quote, to subvert the Constitution and convert America to a communistic utopia, unquote. Next entry, child exploitation, the use of children as verbal and visual props in the promotion of detrimental policies, such as Hitler and Obama surrounding themselves with children when appealing to the public to approve government confiscation of firearms. Choice, noun. 1, the operational characteristic of a free market. 2, a freedom that liberals tout when they're pimping for Planned Parenthood, but try to restrict in the people's access to real medical care. 3, a euphemism for the murder of unborn children. Right to choose, a phrase designed to subliminally link killing unborn children to some non-existent right, supposedly granted to citizens by the Constitution of the United States. Last entry, Christian, someone who believes in the principles upon which this nation was founded, yet needs to be afforded less the rights than Muslims who are trying to destroy this country. So that's where I'm going to leave it for right now, and I will be back in a minute. Okay, so to wrap up this episode, I am going to ask, who are the true conservatives? And the true conservatives in this country are the people that understand that conservatism is a lifestyle. They are patriotic people who use common sense. They make judgments instead of predictions. They speak clearly and definitively and are not afraid to say no. They are open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They're consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. And then I did want to, I have one last segment that I want to start adding to this podcast on a regular basis, and I want to go ahead and start today, and that is a segment I'm going to call Way to Go, President Trump. Too many times, we have a situation where we have a president, very unique president in that we have a president that is perhaps the best in that he is the most reflective of average Americans. This country is founded on the idea, a lot of ideas, but one of them is the idea that anybody can be president of the United States, anybody, as long as you meet two basic criteria, that you were born in this country and that you're over 35 years of age. And other than that, anybody, you, me, the milkman, whoever, can be president of the United States. Not so, and you got President Trump over in England, who is over in England, and he's sitting down having a state dinner with the Queen and various princes and duchesses, etc. And so you have a contrast there between President Donald Trump, average American. I claim that Donald Trump is a true conservative. He's not a perfect true conservative, but he's much more of a true conservative than Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Hugh Hewitt, Glenn Beck. So, but that he's an average American. He does not speak diplomatic speak. He does not, the way he speaks, the way he handles himself is the same way any average American would. If somebody insulted you, you would want to insult them back. They flip you off, you flip them off back. That's the way President Trump does things. And so what I want to congratulate him for is one of his Twitter. He was on his way over to the United Kingdom for his state visit, and the mayor of London insulted him and made some kind of a remark I'm not going to bother to repeat, but the president went back at him and referred to him as one of the biggest losers of all time. Good for you. Way to go, President Trump. Because this is the president that we all say that we want. This is the president that doesn't mince words. He doesn't fall back into diplomatic speak or lawyer speak or some other gobbledygook or babbling. He speaks plainly. You know where he's coming from. If he's not happy with you, you know about it. If he likes you, you know about it. He's a plain-speaking American, and good for you, President Trump. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.